Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Simbler Miller.
Relationships between Blacks and Jews in the United States have varied depending on the era. Jewish leaders marched side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. for civil rights in the 1960s. What about today, though? When Black Lives Matter proponents may target Jews as quote unquote white oppressors. Today, our special guest is a Black Jew who will share with us his perspective. Kenry Allan Hutchinson II is an American film director who served in the United States Air Force and graduated from the American Jewish University with an undergraduate degree in literature, communication, and media. He converted to Judaism in January of 2018. Kenry, thank you so much for coming on our show and welcome.
Thank you, ladies, for having me. I appreciate it.
Kenry, could you first share with us your background? And are you comfortable sharing with us why you converted to Judaism?
Yes and yes. So my background is my mother's American, mostly Black American, and my father, him and his family are from Belize. So if anyone want to pull up their nice little map, it's nestled between in the Gulf of Mexico, just south of Mexico and east of Guatemala. So I have a very, let's say, intriguing origin because it's Belize isn't necessarily like Black per se, but it's very mixed race. And my mom and dad, they met here in Los Angeles in high school. They had me while they were in high school, and yeah. So as I mentioned, I spent most of my time here, and then I started off at university in Northern California, and then moved into the Air Force, which I spent 4 years between 2010 and 2014. Once I finished my contract, I began to attend LA City College for a couple of years to study film production and directing, which took me on an unusual path, which was to American Jewish University, where, as I mentioned, I studied literature, communication, and media. But also, that's where I came full frontal with Judaism. And it was from there I actually the light bulb moment actually happened at one of your previous people who came on your podcast, Rabbi Michael Berenbaum. It was actually in his class in April of 2017 where I just had the close quote come to Jesus moment, except not Jesus but Judaism. So yeah, that's where it started. And my history with Judaism has been interesting, considering that I grew up Pentecostal, non-denomination, and you can say that's where my affinity for Judaism began, just because of talking Bible or Torah, as you may say, and also just my interactions with Jews and throughout my life up to that point. And then when I got out the service, I would say I was, somewhat religious. I wasn't as religious growing as I was when I was a younger person. I traveled around a little bit, met a bunch of people. One of the things that I craved outside of one of the things I craved was to have some sort of moral, spiritual direction, and also community. And leaving the Air Force, you're leaving your community. You're leaving a bunch of people that, you have broke bread with and fought alongside. And so I was looking for community. I was looking for spiritual guidance. I was looking for something that matches more of my temperament and particular outlook on the world. And, Judaism was there, and it came to me at a very intriguing time in my life. So, yeah, I started the process in April of 2017 after, my class. It was called the Jewish Nation, uh, with Rabbi Berenbaum. And I literally talked to a friend who converted, found the Intro to Judaism, Miller Intro to Judaism program at AJU. And then I've been on that boat ever since.
Interesting. And yeah, so the Jewish community was also a big factor in attracting you to Judaism.
Precisely.
So let's roll back to your experiences earlier, especially in the Air Force. So in the Air Force, did you face anti-Black sentiments directly to you? And then did you overhear anti-Jewish sentiments expressed at either Jewish members of the Air Force or just, an everyday conversation when people use those derogatory terms?
Okay, so I'll answer the second question first, because I think the first question is it's a little bit more to unpack. But um, in my experience, I had thought about, like, man, how many Jewish people did I have actually met in the military, and I can only come up to two people.
Okay, wait, I
So
need to say this one thing for our audience, because I have frequently done a lot of work. Jews serve in the U.S. military in the same percentage that they serve in the U.S. population. And this is something I always try to get across, that yes,
right,
American Jews do serve in the U.S. military, but since the percentage of Jews in the U.S. population is small, that's not unusual that Kenry didn't come across a lot of Jews in the military. Okay, that's my paid announcement. Go ahead.
fair enough. But yeah, I came across two that I knew of, that I knew that we have had either we've had some sort of conversation. One of them particularly, she was from Brooklyn, and her mother and I so happened to share the same birthday. She unfortunately passed away some time ago, but in terms of any sort of, like, say, anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic statements or anything like that, not that's something that you really didn't hear, from my perspective, and the people I interacted with. It just wasn't something, a topic of our conversations. But also at the same time, I was in the military from 2010 to 2014, so I'll say the environment was extremely different. And I will say at that time there wasn't any hoopla, like big hooplas going on in Israel and Palestine, even though there always is. But I think it was never brought to the concern of us and the service. But the Black question is quite intriguing, because there is I in while in the service, I'm not gonna say I never, I have experienced some level of racism and bigotry. Um, I'll give you a great story. I used to so when I was at my first duty station in Virginia, I used to coach youth football. And in a town that was about 98% white. And to this day, I love this town. I love it. I love the kids. Now they're young men, because this was back into 2011. Now we're in 2023. So a lot of them now have beards and all grown up and stuff, and have tattoos, and they're working and finish universities. So I'm so proud of them for what the men that they became. Uh, but yes, but at the time, I was the only Black coach, and little to my knowledge that there was a small minority, but vocal minority of parents who did not like the fact that I was coaching their child. Um, and within this town, it's right next to a very prominent African American community that is pretty notorious for its violence, in Newport News, Virginia. So, and then Hampton has a little bit of this trouble, and this town is Poquoson. which is, just south, if I remember, no, it's south or west of it. And so from there, I didn't directly face it, but news came to light later when when the head coach came to me and told me about the things that happened, where because of me he was getting nasty text messages, and then also getting feces thrown at his house because of me. And unfortunately he had to face it. And what he tried to shield me from all that noise, because he wanted, he knew that I love these kids and I wanted to coach these kids. And his wife at the time, she used to work at Hampton University, which is a historically Black college. And what she did was she got a couple of her students and she brought them over. So now we have more Black coaches. So that just really kind of ticked off everybody.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Evelyn has a question now about the ADL.
Sure.
Evelyn? Evelyn, did you cut off?
I'm having some tech difficulties again. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Would you like me to ask that question?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me. So, surveys by the Anti-Defamation League have found that the percentage of people holding anti-Semitic views is significantly higher in the Black population than in the general American population. How are Jews perceived by those members of the Black community who are anti-Semitic? Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes. So I think it's a really good question. I think one of the things we have to consider is when we think of Jews in the United States, sometimes it comes with this caveat. And I feel like this is a topic of conversation that's happening within the Jewish community in terms of what is white, and who is white. And I think historically, especially over the past 50 to 60 years, we have had, this major conversation about, are Jews white people or are they not? Because the sentiments, some of the anti-Semitic sentiments, could be actually attributed to the fact that Ashkenazi Jews present as white, and that that is there. So there's definitely an anti-whiteness to people in the Black community. There's also and there's also just a level of anti-Jewishness, just straight up. There's had nothing to do with being white, and it has to do with many Blacks who moved from the South to the cities during the 30s and to the 20s, the 10s, the 20s, and the 30s. So in the Midwest and New York City, where many Black people are now interacting with Jews, and their experiences wasn't, let's say the experiences wasn't always pleasant. I think that's the case with many minorities within the United States, that you have two minority communities living next to each other, there's going to be tension. It's particularly in the United States, where, especially in these communities, like, for example, let's go to New York, because I feel like we're going to talk about, for example, like maybe even the Crown Heights riots, maybe a little bit later, but Jews at this time, they owned a lot of of the shops, many of the apartment complexes, and many things like that. So the relationship between Jews and Blacks, particularly during the early 20th century, was always in, as is this power dynamic of, like, the person with money and the person without money. And that even comes down to, the funding of the NAACP and the Urban League, who were a lot of the historically Black colleges, which was funded by quite a bit of the Jewish people. So there's a bit of a resentment that is nestled within that. of having kind of this secondary role of, hey, they're, we're following the money type of thing, which it's not true. Because I think once you understand Jews and what many Jews really want to accomplish, uh, I think you can see that there's a kinship that Jews have towards Black people, and in terms of similar struggles, and and even within large segments in the Black community, that's still the case as well. Uh, but I feel like there's things that we get, but the thing is, I feel like especially within the Black intellectual class, uh, which is what I would consider left. So what I mean by left, I mean anti-capitalistic, anti-liberal, uh, anti-Western heterodox thinking uh, thinkers. That's what when people usually say left, that's not in a derogatory manner, but that's what they usually mean when we say left, or Marxist, Maoist thinkers. Um, the big, some of the big proponents, some of the big thinkers in the Black community were considered in the left, and that came into prominence. It didn't come too much into prominence until about the 60s, where we start having the rise of Black nationalism. Black nationalism has existed, but it took a whole new twist with the Black Panthers, uh, and similar movements like the Nation of Islam. Even though the Nation of Islam has been around since the 30s, but you have obviously people like Malcolm X, and especially after the 6 Day War in '67, you have this big change within the Black community that start to really resonate with the global left. So the relationship with Arabs is actually very crucial to that, but also sympathies for very anti-Semitic groups. So the Nation of Islam, for example, have then and now have associations with known Ku Klux Klan members and known Nazi Party members. So that's not really a far-fetched, it's not a very far-fetched thing. And I feel like a lot of Jews, particularly progressive Jews, really tend to ignore these histories because it's, I think presently it's kind of biting us in the butt. But you have that left-leaning intellectual anti-Semitism there. And then obviously that transformed to anti-Zionism, which now it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword. So this left thinking infiltrated the Black community because some of this is originated within Black intellectualism. The thought process of the Jews being, money hungry, and some of those very tropic things that we heard from Christian Europe for over, for a few thousand years. So but the difference between that, like the Black anti-Semitism that began with the New Left, or that predates the New Left, is that this happens irregardless of what is happening in Europe, because there's a notion amongst many people, especially I'll say left-leaning people, that Black people just osmosisly gained anti-Semitism. There's not something that is like originator and stuff like that, and I would disagree. It's very disrespectful because you're saying Black people have no agency, but also we have to acknowledge that Black people there are some Black people who have came to that conclusion without any assistance of white people. And I think that is where we really start seeing, and then from there we start really seeing some uptick in anti-Semitism, and even though even to today we start seeing groups like Black Lives Matter, which is the kind of the next evolution of the New Left, which now it went during the 60s it was more cultural, and then we start adding intersectionality, so gender, race, sex, into a Marxist Maoist presupposition, I think is the right term. Then you get this mixture, thoughts, and you get Black Lives Matter, and but the thing is that, I mean, its tenets towards Jews are still the same. And unfortunately, a lot of blacks blacks who are really into like Pan-Africanism or Black intellectualism or Black nationalism, they do hold these negative anti-Semitic views on Jews.
I wanted
And
to ask you about Black Lives Matter. Oh, go ahead, Evelyn.
yeah, so if I understand you well, you're saying um, there are Black people in the United States who look at Jews as white people, and
Right.
so there is that general, let's say, tension between Black and white people that also counts for Jews as white people.
Yes.
There is also an influence of um, um, Black intellectuals since the 60s, who are mostly leaning left and anti-capitalism, and associate Jews with money. Also
I
because
so,
Jews were, so to speak, in the 60s, the shop owners, and the Blacks were the shopkeepers.
Right.
yeah, I would just want to make a couple of clarifications on that. So it wasn't just in the 60s, because you have notions with people like Marcus Garvey, who came, he predates the 1960s, but he's the huge foundation of Black nationalism, in the 1920s and 1930s, spewing anti-Semitism. So it wasn't just the 1960s where it began, but it took on a new face in the 1960s. And a lot of the interactions between blacks and Jews, it also again started in the 1910s, 1920s. So these sentiments have kind of been building over, let's say, 40 to 50 to 60 years until we get to the 1960s.
And then being in the political left movement,
Yes.
um, the association of Blacks and Arabs also
Yes.
happened, which led to
Exactly.
anti-Zionism.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so let's talk 2023 now. Would
Sure.
you say that a plank of the Black Lives Movement is anti-Semitism? That is an important part, a small part. How does that fit into what we've been talking about?
Yes. So it's going to be a very complicated. That's very
Okay, just
complicated in the
simple
sense.
answer, because we have a lot of questions there.
Sure. It's so, from my perspective, the answer is yes. Just because if I equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, I think you can't necessarily distinct between the two, because even if you were to argue that, oh, I'm just anti-Zionist, how does that anti-Zionism normally plays out? It plays out as in some sort of antagonism towards Jews who don't live in Israel, but they live in Europe, or they live in in the Americas, or they live in Australia, or what so. So yes, and I think also with having that Marxist under that Marxist language and Marxist foundation, which in fact is also pretty anti-Semitic. Uh, it's there, even if the person individually do not believe that they are anti-Semitic or even anti-Zionist. I think even within the ideology and the thought process, it is extremely anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist.
Thank you for that explanation. Evelyn, went to the next question.
So now let's discuss what you have been experiencing since October 7th. For those people who know you are Jewish,
Yes.
has there been increased pushback against you?
No. I'll be honest with you, just because I haven't been as vocal, because usually when things happen, I prefer to just listen. However, I am surprised by what's going on social media, by people that I know who are saying things that I find pretty important. Um, because I was like, wow, this is what you really believe. And most people who know me don't know me as Jewish, because I don't come across with very particular Jewish features. So I may not get it as much. but also it kind of hurts. Not kind of hurts. It hurts when I see people post certain things that are either fabrications or extremely anti-Semitic. Um, and it breaks my heart. So it's been a bit of a rustle to deal with and to understand where people are coming from and how did people get to the beliefs that they have.
So let's talk about, is there any hope? What can be done about improving relationships between Blacks and Jewish people in the United States? And is it a relationship worth fighting for?
The relationship is worth fighting for. I think what we need to do is I think we have to acknowledge. I think for Jews, we have to acknowledge uh the position how we come into some of these let's say political alignments. We come into it in a sense of like, yes, we want to help and be of assistance and stuff like that, but also at the same time, many Black people feel that Jews are only using them to advance their own political goals and agendas. And I don't want to say it and make it sound like all the Jews are on the same page, because that's definitely not true.
I'm sure you learned that.
Oh, whew, when they said, two Jews, three opinions, I think they were being very nice because it's like two Jews, 20 opinions.
Yeah.
But I think we have to get away from some of these stereotypes of, Jews control the media and Jews are this and Jews are that, but also have to acknowledge that regardless of the fact that Jews are only 2% of the United States population, we do have a huge influence on many things that are coming out, particularly in our literature, within our media and stuff like that. And that has to do with the fact that these are the jobs that Jews had, to work and build themselves up.
Exactly.
So it's not like, there's some conspiracy, because I'm still waiting for my card, my card to the Jewish conspiracy meeting. I haven't got it yet. So if you can send it to me, please let me know. I want to be part of it. But
But what you just said, I think is worth repeating without going into a history lesson. When Jews came as
right,
immigrants to the United States, there were only certain fields open to them, both as immigrants and as Jews. And so there is a
yes,
concentration of Jews in certain industries today.
yeah, and especially the industry that I work in. I mean, remember, in the 1900s, no one wanted to work in Hollywood. It was a bunch of whack jobs and weirdos. So who wants to work with whack jobs and weirdos? It was not seen as a respectable industry. Obviously, it did not become very respectable until the studio and obviously the studio industry came about, or the studio system started coming about
Yes.
in the 1910s and 20s. But I digress. It's back to the question. So I think as Jews, we have to understand that how we're getting into these relationships. We're getting into relationships in terms of political means, but also in a sense of enemies. Like, so we come together because we have a shared suffering,
Mm-hmm.
which is good, but it's also bad, because the thing is that we're not seeing each other for who we are
Mm-hmm.
as people and as individuals. So that's actually like my if I have a big fright with people in the Jewish community, particularly Ashkenazi Jews, is that we gotta move past the politics. We gotta get moved past all that, because the thing is that you're only seeing Black people for what is presented in this very political sense, which is actually pretty prejudiced, and because it's like the bigotry of low expectations. When you talk to some Jews about Black, like some of the most, I'll be honest, some of the most abhorrent racist things that have ever was said to me was by other Jews. Like I went on the date with this one girl a couple of years ago, and I was like, hey, like, because if we got together, got married, and we had a kid, the kid will be perceived as Black, and I asked her, like, how do you feel about if we were to have a Black child? And she's like, I don't want a Black child. I'm like, whoa, why would you say that to me? Like, what do you think we're trying to do? We're just here socializing and talking. So things like that, like things like that, where many some Jews have this, you know, have this bigotry about Black people and what they're perceived because what they learned at university and what they see on television. And the thing is, they have not really interacted with Black people who are not part of that crew. And I think that's the key.
I'm going to have another commercial break right here for our listeners.
Sure.
When he talks about Ashkenazi Jews, he's talking about Jews primarily from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And in Israel, this is not the case in terms of, I don't want to quote numbers without knowing for sure, but I recently saw, okay, so I'm just saying, I recently saw something like 50% of Jews, I'm not talking about others in Israel, don't present as white. So I think and many of them are what we call Sephardic or Mizrahi, and they come from Arab countries where they were kicked out after 1948. So I think this is really important to say that the American Jewish communities, by and large, are not as knowledgeable about the fact that Jews come in all different colors.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that clear. Because we
and
have...
also,
Go ahead.
Also, I want to add another thing. So if you talk about the population in Israel, 20% of the population in Israel is either Arab or Bedouin. So this notion, I just really want to dispel this quick notion, is that Israel is white. That's so not true. I mean, even in my opinion, Ashkenazi Jews aren't white. I just have to say that. But despite that, Israel isn't a white country, and this idea that it is actually extremely troubling.
And I would like to add that maybe in the eyes of an American Black person, an Ashkenazi Jew, an Eastern European Jew, or an American Jew is white. But to Hitler, those Jews were not white enough. And for that, they were killed.
Exactly.
So I know people who have dyed their hair blonde during World War II to stay, not to seem to be Jewish.
Yeah, I think another thing I will definitely want to add to that is, this idea of Jewish exceptionalism. I mean, now it's coming into question with what things are going on with the university system, but for really kind of the first, like, United States is really one of the first places where Jews were able to go and excel and really didn't have some of those barriers to entry that they experience while in Europe, or even to into the Middle East and into Africa and stuff like that, allowed to really show what you can do. And you've seen that within the education system, you see that within the Ivy League system, you've seen that in many of the corporations, many of the nonprofits, intellectualist space, just even sports. I mean, Red Auerbach is actually one of my favorite people. So, like, you seem Jews haven't given that opportunity, have took that baton and had just ran with it as if they were Jamaican sprinters, because it's like finally we have the opportunity to go out and like show what we can do. And I feel like a lot of people, I'll say some people are jealous of that because they felt like, because they, when they get the baton, they can't go as far. And I think just talking about your question, Phyllis, like what things that Black people can do. I think one thing is, like, I think Black people could learn from what some of the things that Jews have done to help improve themselves, because by God, we know Jews have learned from Black people as well. So we have to make sure that exchange of information, exchange of knowledge, generational knowledge and things like that are passed free flowingly between the communities, because I feel like both communities can both help each other, not just in a political sense, but just in a friend sense, of a sense of like, you know what, I don't see you for the political entity that I see you for, but I see you as a Jew as a person, but you as a Jew as an individual. And I think, yes, I understand your struggles, but also we're not binding together because of struggles. We're bonding together because of shared experience, shared compassion, shared knowledge. And, honestly, Torah is a great place to even share as well.
Kenry, do you have recommendations for our listeners as to how they can respond to anti-Jewish and anti-Black statements?
Okay. I think it depends on the space. Um, I feel like with a lot of, let's say, our younger, say your younger viewers or millennials and Gen Zers, their first instant reaction is to go and proselytize themselves on social media, and I feel like that's you don't do that because it's a bit narcissistic because it's really making it about you instead of about the people that it is harming. Honestly, I'm pretty old fashioned, but I feel like the only way to combat anti-Semitism, anti-Blackness, or just bigotry as a whole is how you carry yourself as a person. When you walk out into the world, you understand that these things aren't right, and then yes, you should address it, but address it in a manner where it's respectful. Address it in a manner that is not you're not taking away the humanity of somebody else because most things that are said in a bigoted manner is said out of ignorance, not necessarily out of like a true deep seated hatred. With those people, there's nothing you can do. But in terms of most people, it's about opinion. So honestly, ask, talk, be inquisitive. I think that's a beautiful thing about Judaism and about being Jewish is the always trying to figure things out and to question. And just because someone says something anti-Semitic or sexist or whatever, don't shut them down. Invite them in. Do the opposite. Sun Tzu, Art of War. Is what like you do what other people are you don't expect. I mean, we can talk about the whole Palestinian Israeli issue or Gaza Israeli issue, and what the Gazas are doing is exactly what is written in Sun Tzu Art of War. So, and the thing is, these things work because we have to like when they're expecting to get pushed back, when you invite them in and you show them and you reveal their humanity. That's how we can connect with people. That's how we can have these discourses because thank God we're not having to deal with the situation that is in our homeland, but here at least we have the space to actually have these conversations before hopefully pray to God it gets violent.
So try to have a respectful conversation with somebody who stated anti-Semitic or anti-Black
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. And as someone has said to me, even a simple question like saying to someone calmly, what do you mean by that? Or what does that mean to you? It sounds like such a simple question, but it's a great opener, I've been told. I haven't gotten
Yes,
to
it
try
is.
it out yet, I admit. But as we come to the end of this really fascinating interview, do you have any last thoughts that you wish to share with our audience?
Yes. So um excuse my French, but I have to say it. I think coming to Judaism has been the best fucking thing I've ever done. And again, I'm sorry to those, but that's how I genuinely feel about Judaism, not just as a religious belief, but also as being part of the community um and just being part of this life. And that's something I've just been ever since I've converted. It's been an amazing experience. Um, and I want to say that we as a people, we have to understand that we for the first time in many years we are in control a lot of things that we can do where now we don't have to respond to what somebody else does. So we have to allow our action. So we have to be very conscious of our actions and how we interact with the world and interact with ourselves and even within our own community. Because I'll be honest with you, it tore my heart that these people in the Jewish community were tearing themselves over because it's like one person voted for Trump and the other person voted for Clinton or Biden, and we can't. Or even what happened when uh, with the Supreme Court in Israel and stuff like that. We can't allow these things to divide us because we're only 15 million people. I mean, seriously, there's more people. There's more people in LA. I think LA County than there is Jewish people in the world. So we need to be very conscious of that. So like when we divide ourselves, we're making it hard for ourselves, because the people who do want to hurt us are going to see that as an opportunity to attack us. And I don't mean that physically, but I mean that emotionally. I mean that spiritually. I mean that intellectually. So the thing is, I'm not saying that we need all need to come together and sing kumbaya, but the thing is, we need to have grace. Very Christian word, I know, but
I know, but it's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. And I thank you for coming on the show and being willing to discuss this often difficult topic, but very important topic. And I thank our listeners for listening. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn, myself, for our work, you can go to Never Again Is Now podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And as we say, as we end every show, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.